Half of all Americans could see higher taxes under the GOP Senate bill, as President Trump promises a big, beautiful tax overhaul by Christmas. Investigations are dropped into 22 deaths of San Diegans in custody. We explore why. In North County, residents struggle to address rising sea levels while maintaining the value of oceanfront homes. And City Heights residents grapple with a sudden interest in their neighborhoods from well-heeled real estate buyers. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Mark.
Good to have you here today. Freelance journalist Kelly Davis. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're back with us. Reporter Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS News. Hi, Allison.
Great to be here, Mark.
Glad you're here today. And KPBS City Heights reporter Taryn Mento. Hi, Taryn.
Hi, Mark.
Well, with no hearings on 400-plus pages of sweeping legislation, Republicans in the House passed a tax rewrite heavily favoring corporations and the rich. The estimated hit to the federal budget deficit is $1.5 trillion over 10 years. Now the effort faces a significantly different bill in the U.S. Senate, but both versions, which the GOP hopes to reconcile and pass into law by Christmas, have dramatic impacts on Californians. Eric, start with the high points of the House bill, which is, as I said, already passed.
Well, I think that one of the items that we're looking at very closely here in California is what they call SALT, which is the deduction for state and local taxes. And as you probably know when you visit your doctor, too much salt and your blood pressure is going to go up, and that's precisely what's happening on Capitol Hill, particularly in states like California. In fact, California has higher property values. We also have higher tax rates here. And so that deduction is a little bit more important to the residents in the state of California. And it's causing some issues politically for some of the congressmen here. We can talk about that in a minute, but I want you to understand what this state and local tax deduction is. So when you sit down to do your taxes at the end of the year and you itemize your deductions, you look at all the state and local taxes you're paying, property taxes, taxes on bonds, all the other local taxes you might pay in your community. You can deduct that from your taxable income on the federal form. And it can lower your tax bill significantly if you itemize your deductions, which is what most homeowners in this area do. And what both of the House and the Senate bills do is they remove that deduction. They do increase the deductibles, so possibly fewer people will be itemizing their deductions. The standard deduction is going to be doubled, but it basically eliminates that deduction, and the contention is that that hurts California residents more than it does, say, residents of Mississippi, where the tax rates are a lot lower.
Mm-hmm. In Florida and Texas, they are, of course, red states, and they benefit, and some of the Democrats are criticizing this because it does nail, as you said, California, New York, New Jersey, places that voted for Democrats. Exactly.
And here's kind of the line of thinking of at least one person that I talked to about this, Richard Barrera with the San Diego Unified School District. He said, look, San Diego voters have decided to approve school tax bonds, to improve the quality of schools, and they get punished by this measure. Let's listen to what he said. Mm-hmm.
A race to the bottom that this federal plan supports and endorses, when in a place like California and in San Diego, when we come together and we're willing to make sacrifice so that we can have strong public schools, we get punished.
All right, and that's basically the Democrats' argument here in California. And what are Republicans claiming is the major benefit of cutting taxes in this fashion?
Well, if you cut, this is what they're calling a loophole in the tax law, and they're saying that what they want to do is close this loophole. It's going to save them a significant amount of money, which they can count as cost savings. Mm-hmm. But there are some political issues at play here, particularly in California. 3 Republicans in the House in California, Darrell Issa, Dana Rohrabacher, and Tom McClintock, all voted against the House tax bill. They were given some leeway, I think, by the Republican Party because they had a large enough margin. They voted against it because their reelection isn't certain, and in their districts, there are a lot of high-value properties, presumably a lot of voters, Republican voters, who would not be happy by losing this deduction. So it's something that is is playing out politically as well.
Yeah, Allison?
I'm sure probably Congressman Iser is very relieved that he was given permission by his party to vote against it.
He actually was the first California Republican to speak out before the vote against it, saying he wasn't going to vote for it, and 2 other Republicans did.
Yeah, I wanted to cite that. He did issue a statement after the vote last week. He says, "I didn't come to Washington to raise taxes on my constituents, and I don't plan to start today." And again, that plays into what you were saying. He's in a tough fight. Now, you take Duncan Hunter in East County, a safe Republican district, at least it has been in the past, despite his troubles now. He doesn't have to worry about it. He voted in favor of this bill, but ICE is in a different position.
Right, and there are other, California Democrats or California Republicans who are at risk here. Some of the ones we have talked about: Darrell Issa, Ed Royce, Dana Rohrabacher, Steve Knight in Palmdale. These are all Republicans that where their constituents stand to lose significantly if this measure is approved and signed by the president.
Taryn?
Have there been any polls done of voters in California to get a sense of how do they really feel?
I haven't seen any polls on that, so I'm not sure exactly where the public lies on this issue. But
it hasn't fared well nationally, though. I did see a Quinnipiac, if that's how you pronounce that poll, a national poll, and it was 2-1 against of the folks who knew about the bill and had an opinion against passing this Republican bill.
I've looked at a lot of the coverage of this around the country, and what you notice, it's not just a concern in those high-tax states like California, New York, New Jersey. It's also a concern in Ohio, which is politically a swing state, and it's an important state for Republicans, both in presidential elections and it's a high-population state, so in elections in the House as well.
But do you think that, at this time when a lawmaker basically cannot keep their seat without a lot of financial support, this marks a shift towards them really having to serve the interests of their funders, possibly over the interests of their constituents?
I'm not sure how it affects the fundraising, but every constituent has a pocketbook that they look at, and they try to figure out whether or not their representative is taking care of their pocketbook as well. So
we did have that comment from the Republican congressman last week, kind of a frank moment where he said, "I've had big donors say, hey, don't call me again if this thing doesn't pass." Right. So it does get to that. Let's talk for a minute about the difference between the Senate bill and the House bill. The big one, it seems to me, is Republicans in the Senate have also removed the Affordable Care Act mandate that everyone buy insurance. And what do analysts say that will have? For one thing, it helps on the revenue side from the Republican standpoint, right?
Well, what the Affordable Care Act mandate is a penalty that people would pay if they decide not to sign up for insurance during the course of a year. And it really kind of conflates 2 issues, and I think even the White House has kind of backed away from making this a requirement. But it conflates the health care debate, which the Republicans have not been successful at moving forward, with the tax debate, which is something that they're hoping to get passed originally by Thanksgiving. I don't think that's going to happen. So now by the end of the year. And the mandate is designed to save money. What the Republicans are saying, if they remove this penalty, it will save them money because fewer people will sign up and fewer people will need subsidies. And so they'll save $300 billion over the course of 10 years. But what they haven't talked about publicly is the fact that if that's the case, if the healthy people leave the pool, that will raise rates for everybody else. So that will increase the need for subsidies for those who are staying in the system, and it might make some health care unaffordable. And I think that's a touchy issue from some of the Senate Republicans, and so we're not sure if that's going to stay in the bill.
All right, well, we about run out of time on this segment, but there's a lot of moving parts to this, and everybody should watch very closely in the next couple of weeks because the Senate's going to pass it, or they're not going to pass it, and we'll see the fate of this entire bill and the political ramifications of that. Going to move on now. The news was jarring. Nearly 24 investigations of why people died in county jail or during arrests are being dropped. That's the decision of the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board. Kelly, start by explaining the oversight role of this board. Who are they? What do they do?
So this is a county police review board. It's made up of, not remember the exact number, I think 11 citizens. And then they have staff of an executive officer and 2 investigators. And it's their job to independently investigate all claims of misconduct, abuse, of sheriff's deputies and probation officers, and within that they're also required to review investigate any death in custody, any death in the process, any death that could result from misconduct or a policy lapse involving the sheriff's department or probation.
All right, and we said at the outset that 22 investigations are being dropped. What's the basic reason behind that?
Their CLRB is the kind of shorthand for the board. They're citing the it's changed names, Public Safety Officers Bill of Rights, which says that any investigation of potential misconduct that could result in discipline must be completed within a year. But that law, it's California law, and it's applied to the department that will be imposing the discipline. So sheriff's department, if they're going to investigate one of their officers, it has to be conducted within a year. CLRB doesn't impose discipline. They only recommend discipline. And so a number of experts I talked to said, just leave the discipline part off and complete the investigation, because some of these investigations, very complicated, number of deputies might have been involved, and it's going to take longer than a year to get all the information and to really do a thorough review.
Mm-hmm. Taryn?
Did any of the members of the board express, I guess for lack of a better word, disappointment in not being able to complete these within that time frame?
So I went to the meeting where they voted in closed session to officially dismiss all these cases. There were a number of citizens who showed up to say, please, do these investigations. Like poker faces on all the members of CLRB. They didn't say a word. They sat there and listened to all this public testimony. They had received a letter from the ACLU. They had received emails. My story, Jeff McDonald from the UT did a story. They did not say a word. They did not acknowledge that there's this outcry over all these cases being dismissed.
How long have some of these members been on the board?
I'm not sure. It's a range of 2 years, 5 years. They've got a couple new members.
I couldn't help noticing in some of the examples of the deaths that were in your story that rather than actually being responsible for killing somebody, the deputies were being accused perhaps of preventing someone from taking their own life, because often, mental health issues are at stake. And so, do you think that perhaps in some ways the reason these cases are proliferating is because the Sheriff's Department is dealing with problems that really ought to be being dealt with more on a mental health level?
Yeah, there were a number of instances where, and there's actually lawsuits resulting from a number of suicides of folks who committed suicide in county jail, and the allegations are that the deputies didn't do enough to prevent their loved ones from committing suicide. And across the board, mental health issues have come up. I think folks who were seriously mentally ill, and they were placed in solitary confinement, not given psychiatric help, and just kind of left on their own, not given safety garments or safety blankets. And so they were able to fashion a noose and, hang it from a light fixture. And
let's talk about, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
I didn't want to get to a specific case. Start with the Moriarty case.
Yeah, Heron Moriarty kind of slipped into mental illness, had a psychotic breakdown. I believe he was arrested for threatening somebody. I can't remember the exact details, but his wife called the jail multiple times saying, please watch my husband, keep an eye on him. He's attempted suicide. He's threatened suicide. And they did nothing about it. And he was able, he had a shirt that he could tie up, and he strangled himself.
So that's one that will not be pursued then by the Citizens Board. And then the 70-year-old Russell Hartsaw, that was the oldest case being dismissed.
Yeah, that was a very tragic case. Mentally ill man. He was gay. He was elderly. He was very frail. He was supposed to be in protective custody because he was so vulnerable. And they put him in a quad, like a dorm-style jail unit, where he was beaten to death by several gang members.
Okay. Now, has this happened before where they've dropped a number of these cases?
This is unprecedented, unheard of. Everyone I spoke to, lots of experts who've had long histories in law enforcement oversight, were shocked. A lot of comments that I did not include in my story because it was to express such shock and outrage, because this just doesn't happen.
All right. Well, we've got to move on, but we'll see what the ramifications are as we go forward of dropping these cases. Well, a critical climate change controversy is playing out among an enclave of seaside houses in Del Mar. It has to do with the impact of a rise in sea level from 1 to 3 feet in coming decades. So, Allison, start with this report that was considering the impact of this sea rise, and what did it say?
Well, Del Mar is a little bit ahead of the game. I think the Coastal Commission gave funds to various different cities, including Del Mar, to try to come up with not only an assessment of the risk, but also how they would adapt to sea level rise. So Del Mar came up with the risk assessment and said, probably a foot by 2050 and maybe 3 by the end of the century, and I've seen other estimates that could be twice that. They worked for a couple of years on an adaptation plan, didn't hear anything, even although they say they sent out notices to the local community. And it was only when they got to the point of just about reaching a recommendation to give to the city council that a lot of the homeowners up at the north end who have homes right on the beach there woke up and said, now, wait a minute, your recommendations are that perhaps one of the things that we need to do is consider relocating public things like the pump station and the fire station, but possibly relocating private property. Now, wait a minute. They realized that this might start to affect their property values.
So we can't have that in a report, never mind what the ocean's going to do.
Yeah, and they basically said, look, we all love the beach. Let's focus instead on preserving the beach. That's much the more important thing to do.
Karen?
I understand that they're concerned about their home value, but was there any discussion about safety related to the sea rise? But I mean, it seems like that might be, or is it just the only focus on the values of the home?
I think economics is more what's been coming up. They've even had an economic analysis to show that if you take steps earlier, it'll cost you less in the long run, but that didn't seem to make much difference. The people who own homes along the edge there are not, you can still see a lot of new construction right on the very edge. There's several homes just going up and a lot of remodeling going on. And a real estate agent I spoke to did mention that really she hadn't seen any difference in the property values because people who have that much money, they just want to live where they want to live, and it's worth it to them to spend maybe $20 million on a home that may not be feasible or safe, as you say, within the next 30 years.
Eric?
Just to kind of help us understand what this looks like here, are we talking about homes that are sitting on a beach, or are they above the beach?
Well, that's a good question, because we've heard a lot about homes sitting up on the bluffs and the bluffs eroding, but these are homes right there at the north end of Del Mar, which are right on the beach, and they have small seawalls, probably, 4 foot high to protect them. And in the stormy season, quite often, increasingly often, the ocean will come and break up against those walls and possibly right over the top of it. So one of the risks is that in the future, those storms combined with sea level rise will mean that it'll be increasingly common for the water to come right over those seawalls.
And the public, the city leaders, the planners, they have to worry about what's happening with these public structures and all. And does that remain in the report that they're going to move back, the various, what would it be, lifeguard stations, fire stations, pumping stations, what happened
right, yeah.
to be? So they're going to do that anyway, right?
Well,
Isn't that kind of a clue? Is here's what we're thinking is going to happen?
Yes,
folks?
we, the public agencies, and I think the thing is that this is something that a lot of other cities are obviously thinking about, and they're looking at Del Mar, which has done a lot of work, a lot of scientific research into the impacts and what they can do. And they're saying, yes, we have to take the steps that we as a public agency need to do to be responsible. And part of the purpose of this, I think, is to serve notice, really, to the private sector that, look, it's not as though we didn't warn you. If you don't, want to be participating in these preparatory steps, don't come back to us in a couple of decades and say, well, why didn't you tell us? Because this is us giving you fair notice that we're thinking about this, and what do you want to do?
And is this a little battle there in Del Mar over this report and what they're saying? Does this kind of expand it to the whole West Coast and cities up and down California? Anyway?
Oh, yes, and they all have slightly different situations. Like you mentioned, Solana Beach and Encinitas have a lot more houses up on the bluffs and are dealing with different issues of seawalls along the sand. But I think the Coastal Commission is quite interested in Del Mar's report because it is a small community, so it's kind of like under a microscope, a microcosm of what any city that's dealing with these problems is going to face. Imperial Beach has already done a lot of work, but nobody else has really done this comprehensive adaptation plan that Del Mar was trying to come up with. So other cities may be looking at that and thinking, well, perhaps it's too early to be engaging the private sector in managed retreat, because it's managed retreat that is the strategy that is really threatening.
Well, it's
to
an interesting controversy, and we'll look forward to seeing what the other cities do and what the reaction is going forward with the rise. Well, we'll move on now. Home prices in San Diego remain on the rise, and one of the places that are going up fastest is City Heights. The underserved neighborhood has been overlooked for some time, but now home prices are going up quickly. And Taryn, you looked into this. What's going on? Start with the numbers. What's happening there in City Heights?
Right. So City Heights home values over the next year are going to increase at a rate of 3.9%. And that's the second highest in the county compared to, you just brought it up, Imperial Beach. Imperial Beach is much higher, 6.5%. But the interesting thing about City Heights is that the median home value right now is pretty low compared to the rest of the county. It's around $408,000.
Which is still high.
That is still high for a lot of people.
I mean, there's only a few other zip codes. City Heights has the fifth cheapest by zip code median home.
And of course, this area is your beat. And tell us about the makeup of home ownership and renters. And it's a very diverse community.
Right. I mean, and I haven't directly compared to some of the other cheaper zip codes, but I mean, City Heights, based on census estimates, have a huge population of renters. About 71% people are renting compared to about 30% that are actually owning. And it's where a lot of refugees and immigrants, first go to when they move here. So it's a large Hispanic population, East African population. There's a little bit of a growing Syrian population, Vietnamese population, so incredibly diverse.
And I was going to ask you about the people who live there. With these rising, I don't know if gentrification is the right word, but these rising prices and all. What impacts are some people saying? What's going to happen because of it?
Right. I mean, that's what everyone is kind of talking about, is when you refer to rising home values in a community that's been low income. I mean, I think, and this kind of pulling off the top of my head, I think the median household income is around $38,000, which is pretty low when you're talking about a $408,000 home value. So there's a lot of concern about, if there's a lot of renters, are the landlords going to start seeing opportunities for this being more desirable for higher income populations, and move people out? Because you can do that. You can ask someone to leave if you intend to make renovations, move people out and improve the property and raise the rent that the community who's lived there for a long time can't afford anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that if a house changes hands, then the new purchaser is going to have to raise the rents in order to be able to pay off the mortgage for the higher house price. So,
right. I mean, if a sale, or even just renovating it and renting it out at a higher rate, because now you can get people to pay that.
And you've done a lot of reporting on the immigrant community, the refugee community, which I think has found a haven in City Heights. There's a lot of enclaves there. It could affect their ability to afford it.
I mean, during some past reporting that we've done, it already has. City Heights used to be looked at as the main point, the go-to. It's now kind of shifted, kind of a little bit with the shifting populations that we're seeing coming in, but it's now shifted to El Cajon. And in a story that we did earlier this week about some housing placement problems at one of the resettlement agencies, we're seeing that now they have to go even beyond El Cajon to find more affordable homes. And the trend is continuing east. But one of the things we're looking at is, where are these communities going if they are being priced out of City Heights and El Cajon?
Now, you did talk to homeowner Paul Smith. He's got a Facebook page, Transforming City Heights, and he kind of gave you a tour of some of these changes. We're going to hear a little bit of that here.
When I first started driving around and I first started the page, there was a house here, a house there. And now it's insane. This house just had a second story put on it. This house with the for sale sign, here's another house that's getting gutted. That house has been redone. That house has been worked on. So this house recently got purchased. This house right over here.
All right, we get the idea. Now, yeah, as Eric says, is that good or bad? He has kind of mixed reactions, doesn't he?
I mean, it depends on what community you fit into. Are you a renter or are you a homeowner? I mean, for homeowners who have lived there for a long time, and City Heights has had a bad reputation. A lot of people say that that's not the case anymore. I live there. It's a very nice community, but it's been dealing with this reputation as always looking at it as a down and out place. But you've had homeowners that have lived there for decades. The one person we profiled, he just slowly accumulated pieces of this property, was able to get a second home, rented it out. Finally, it came time when he thought he was going to sell it and give the money to his kids. His kids didn't need it. So now he has this opportunity to retire very well and sell this home. But that also makes people a little concerned. If 70% of our population is renting, historically this has been affordable. What is that going to do with what we can actually afford? If wages aren't increasing, but rental prices are, where are they going to go?
Yeah, where are the renters going to go? And that's the key question there. All right, we've run out of time. We'll look for some more reporting and follow-ups on that very interesting story. And that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Eric Anderson of KPBS News, freelance journalist Kelly Davis, Allison St. John, also of KPBS News, and KPBS City Heights reporter Taryn Mento. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.